All right, now, generations of Noah, they begin to spread out. And so really what's going to happen is the narration is going to dig into the descendants of Shem. Specifically, Shem is going to have a son by the name of Eber, and that's where the Hebrews are going to get their name from. Also, Semites. Shemite. There are people who say, like, black people are descended from Ham, and so that's why they were enslaved for all those years. I don't think that has anything to do with it. Like, that is one of the places people try to go. A few comments made through the years that I was just kind of like, huh. Interesting. No, I don't think that's true. So here's a fun one. This one is discussed in Misreading Scripture with Western Eyes. But Moses, he had a black wife. Yeah, because she would have been Egyptian, which...
That's not allowed at Bob Jones. Sorry, just kidding.
It wasn't, up until George Bush went there. But in the book, if you come from the South, no offense to you from the South, there would have been a tendency to look at Moses having a black wife, and if you notice certain verses, specifically his wife, his sister and stuff, they start bad-mouthing Moses because of his wife. And there are some people who would take that and be like, well, of course, they're bad-mouthing her because he married a black woman. No. They're actually bad-mouthing him because he married up the ladder rather than at his own level. So she actually would have been someone who would have been a little bit higher ranking than him, probably. And so it's not that she's black, it's the fact that she was kind of outside of his league,
Everybody just mad at him.
And they're just kind of like, how dare you, like, like you're marrying for privilege and all that,
Wasn't Moses like...
He was a prince,
Yeah.
But he went out into the wilderness as a shepherd for 40 years, and that's where he got married to one of the leader's daughters.
It's like, hey, I'm a prince. No, you're a shepherd, no.
So like I said, there's a lot of interpretations we can throw at that, but you have to be very careful that you don't take like modern day prejudices and apply them to the Old Testament, because yes, today there's a lot of like black-white prejudice. Back then, guess what color the Hebrews were? They ain't white people, all right? They're more olive color. They're not white people like us. So if you've got dealings with Egyptians, they're probably black or close to it. So just understand, like, there are presuppositions we bring to the text that can get us in trouble.
Even what we were talking about earlier with some
Yeah. So don't bring like modern day problems and apply them to the text and be like, well, I mean, that's clearly what the text is talking about, because it probably isn't. So anyway, next one, some notes on the narrative. First of all, remember this: as we go through the text, notes are not always given in chronological order. So when you read the Bible, there are times where details are given in matter of importance. They're not necessarily given in matters in the order that they happened. Okay? So as we study this, some people actually believe that the events of chapter 11 could have taken place before the events of chapter 10.
Huh?
Okay? So in chapter 10, it's following right off of Noah. He's just finished saying, like, you're going to be cursed, you're going to be blessed, blah, blah, blah. The narrative, because of narrative reasons, picks up in chapter 10 and just says, these are the descendants of Noah. Then in chapter 11, it talks about the Tower of Babel and the splitting up of all the people. There are people who actually think that the Tower of Babel actually could occur before most of the people in chapter 10 are born. So and that actually is consistent with the way ancient man told stories. They're telling stories based on people, and what the people did doesn't really matter chronologically whether it fits or not. This is how I used to teach, and I still do in some ways. When I was teaching like Civil War stuff or Revolutionary War or other things, there are times where sometimes I'm just following like a theme. Like, this is what happened, this battle went to this battle, went to this battle, went to this battle. Then I'll go back and I'll talk about individual people. So it's like, I may have just finished explaining the whole Civil War. Now I'm going back and talking about Stonewall Jackson. Well, he died partway through the war, so we know we're out of chronological order now. So just pay attention, because there are times in the Bible where it's following a theme. It's not necessarily following chronological order. Let me give you another example of where this happens. In the Bible, when we're given the laws, when the children of Israel are receiving laws from God, you'll find like this narrative tells you, you will not worship idols. And then it hops to an instance where they're worshiping idols. It really could have been that way. Like it could have been like God gave the law, they agreed to it, and then immediately went out and broke it. But what it seems to be is, here's the instance, here's the law, and then Moses inserts an account of, and here's where you broke it. And then he goes on to the next one is, here's another law, here's where you broke it. And here's another law, here's where you broke it. It doesn't necessarily mean that it was give the law, the next thing that happened was they broke it, and God gave another law, and the next thing happened, they broke. It's a thematic explanation of what happened rather than chronological. Okay, that makes sense? So as we read this, chapter 10 is going to be the spreading out of people across the earth. Chapter 11 is going to explain why they spread out. Okay? Now, could be that the events are inserted as an explanation for what occurs after verse 10. Look at verse 10. It says this, and the beginning of his kingdom was Babel, and Erech, and Akkad, and Calneh in the land of Shinar. So Nimrod is introduced in verse 9, and then in verse 10 it says, and the beginning of his kingdom was Babel. You hop down to chapter 11, so you skip the rest of that chapter, and it says, and the whole earth was of one language, of one speech. And it came to pass, as they journeyed from the east, they found a plain in the land of Shinar, and they dwelt there, and then they start building the city of Babel. Well, if you insert that whole account right after verse 10, it seems to be a natural flow that you've got these people who are spreading out. God tells them to do exactly what he said to Adam. You need to be fruitful, multiply, fill the earth, have dominion. They don't. They go find the nearest plain, like field, not airplane. They go find the nearest plain in the plains of Shinar, and they basically say, let's build a city here because we're not scattering. And they just start populating the earth and building up a city. So that seems to be how the narrative works. And again, you just see various other characters show up. 23, it's really interesting. So verse 23 of chapter 10, it says, and the children of Aram were Uz and Hul and Gether and Mash. Uz, if you read in Job, it says there was a man in the land of Uz. So that seems to be the same Uz. And so for various reasons, Job is actually viewed to be probably one of the oldest books in the Bible, because it actually takes place probably in this time period. So there's just some things there. It's kind of interesting, but you've got the founding of the land of Uz, which is where Job was from. Again, it says verse 24, and Arphaxad begat Salah, and Salah begat Eber. That's where we get the name Ebers. And unto Eber was born two sons. The name was Peleg, for in his days was the earth divided. So it may chronologically be saying Peleg was alive during Babel and that whole event, and that's the dividing of the earth. It doesn't necessarily seem to be that's when like the plates broke up and floated off, but it might have been. We don't know. And it says, and his brother's name was Joktan. Joktan begat Almadad and Shalef and Jira and Hadoram and Uzzal and Diklah and Obal and Abimael and Sheba and Ophir and Havilah and Jobab. And all of these were the son of Joktan, and their dwellings was from Mesha. I feel like I'm rapping. And the dwelling was from Mesha, and thou goest into Sephar and the mount of the east, and the sons of Shem, after their families, after tongues and their lands and the nations, and the families of Noah and the generations and the nations. But these were the nations divided in the earth after the flood.
Can hop on that flow. Anyway.
Okay.
We did mention that we were what, right?
Yeah, I know.
Can we get you like the 2000s like fisheye camera to like go in and out?
So that's the events there. Okay, moving on. So Peleg. In his land was the earth divided. You will see this mentioned in Genesis 10:25, 1 Chronicles 1:19, and the earth was divided. Generations of Shem. Now, at this point in the narrative, Moses is beginning to narrow it down even further. So we see here, it starts off with Adam. It traces Adam all the way down to the flood and then wipes everyone out, and you begin Noah. All right? And so if we can kind of picture this, it's really, really, really broad. So it's like Adam. Then it narrows it down to Noah, and it traces out so you kind of know like, oh yeah, Japheth went over here, and yeah, you had Ham, and he did this thing, great, really don't care. And then what it does is it traces Shem, and it starts narrowing him down farther and farther until you get to Abram, all right? And so it's a narrowing down further and further and further by use of Toledo, over and over and over. Ah, good, you got it. And so it's beginning to just zoom in, zoom in, zoom in, zoom in until we get to Abram. Okay? Now, as I don't think I have to explain it, but let me just make sure. I am going to use Abraham and Abram interchangeably because, as we understand, his name was Abram and then God changed it to Abraham. Hopefully I don't have to explain that. One of his descendants, Eber, will become the source of the other Hebrews, okay? And so Abram will be referred to as a Hebrew because he's a descendant of Eber, all right? The term Israelite or Israel is going to come from one of Abram's children, whose name is going to be changed to Israel, and so they will be known as the Israelites because they're the children of Israel, okay? So we are using people's names to name countries, and then if you're from that country, you then have the name of the person who founded the country, who happens to be your great grandfather. All right, and so that's where that all comes from. So if they're called Hebrews, which Hebrews is really going to get slapped onto the Jews as well. The term Jew is going to come from people who are of the tribe of Judah, or from the country. You know, remember Israel's going to split, and you're going to have the 10 tribes that go with Israel, and then the 2 tribes which are Judah and like Benjamin. So that's where Jew is going to come from, because they were from Judah. So if you're wondering where all of these labels, and as time progresses, they become a little bit more interchangeable. So Hebrews today, we typically are referring to descendants of Abraham, not necessarily descendants of Eber. If we say Jew, we aren't really making a distinction about what tribe you actually came from. If we say Israelite, yeah, okay, that's pretty specific. But you get the idea. So we're using these names, and they get a little bit more vague. All right, some of the generations of Shem. It's going to come down. It's going to start focusing on this guy by the name of Terah. He's going to be the ancestor, the father of Abram. And then as it goes from Terah is asked to leave. He settles in land of Haran. So the end of chapter 11, it says, "And Terah took Abram his son, and Lot the son of Haran his son's son, and Sarai his daughter-in-law the son of Aram's wife. And they went forth with them from Ur the Chaldees to go into the land of Canaan, and they came unto Haran and dwelt there." And so what you see with Terah is God is calling Abram out. So Abram leaves Ur of the Chaldees. He's going with his father. Because it's a patriarchal system, that's why you see Terah, the one who's focused on. And then once Terah dies, that's where it's like, all right, Abram, you need to leave. So they're going to go from Ur of the Chaldees. They're going to move from Ur of the Chaldees to this place, Haran. Then once Terah is dead, then they're going to migrate from Haran on to the promised land. It says in the days where Terah were 205 years, and Terah died in Haran. And then chapter 12, "Now the Lord said unto Abram, Get thee out of thy country, from thy kindred, and from thy father's house, unto the land I will show thee." So Abram was called out of Haran, but ultimately they came out of Ur of the Chaldees back a little ways. So that's kind of this progression. We're skipping ahead a little bit, but you can see that. It's interesting because the name Terah, from what I understand, means delayed. So it's a fun little thing you'll find in some of the Hebrew naming. The name meaning kind of gives you an idea of what they did. Specifically when you get to like Ruth and stuff, there's some interesting, fun little names. But Terah means delayed. Now, the funny thing is, Abram has the idea, I believe, of exalted father, and it's ironic because he has no kids. And so you're like, okay. And then his name will eventually be changed. And again, it's just kind of cool how God plays around with names to kind of present a picture of what these guys are going through. Several key players are brought in. So you can see chapter 11, verse 27 and following. It says, "Now these are the generations of Terah. Terah begat Abram, Nahor, and Haran. Haran begat Lot. Haran died before his father Terah in the land of his nativity in Ur of the Chaldees. And Abram and Nahor took them wives. The name of Abram's wife was Sarai. The name of Nahor's wife was Milcah, the daughter of Haran, the father of Milcah and the father of Iscah. But Sarai was barren, she had no child." And so what the story is doing is it's setting up several characters that are going to come into play later. And it's also setting up the conflict, which is Sarai is going to become the mother, the mother of Israel and all that, but she can't have kids and she's old. So, so just some interesting little connections. That's why I say it is kind of fun to read the Bible as if it's a story being told. And you start picking up on little narrative clues of this is the conflict about to come into play. And that way, later on, when you run into people, you're like, oh yeah, that guy. You know, and it reminds you of who they are. But okay, and then again, and Terah took Abram his son and Lot the son of Haran, and they moved out, and they move into a land called Haran, and settled there. Days of Terah, like I said, 205 years, and Terah died in Haran. Okay, any questions on all that? Okay.